Chapter 15, Valuing Workforce Diversity. So when we look at it, the American workforce is becoming more and more diverse, racially, ethnically, gender. Increasingly, more and more females and older individuals are continuing to work. So that's one of the things that we're seeing is it's no longer these young white males that make up most of the workforce. As a matter of fact, just a few years ago, for the first time in American history, there were more females working than males. I don't know if that statistic still holds up or not, but the recession really attacked male-dominated jobs, and so there was more than 50% of the workforce was made up by women. So one of the things because of this is that organizations and companies and we as people need to be more aware of valuing diversity and what that can bring, not just to our workplace and not just competitive edge-wise, but also societally as well. So when we look at the dimensions of diversity, there's two different kinds. There's primary dimensions of which we have no control over, like age, race, gender, physical, mental ability, sexual orientation. Those are all things that they are. As much as I'd like to not get older, guess what? Every day I get a little bit older, so my age is something out of my control. Secondary dimensions are things that can be modified over time and may or may not be modified over time. That's health, habits, income, those types of things. Relationship status, when you get out of college you may be single, later on you get married and have kids. Those are secondary dimensions. Those are changeable and malleable. So if we look at prejudiced attitudes, prejudice is a premature judgment or opinion you form about somebody or something without ever examining the facts. So you're basing it and you're making a judgment on your opinion, not really on any kind of hard background information. And oftentimes people make these based on primary or secondary dimensions. And so you talked a little bit about that maybe in terms of in the discussions about female drivers or these stereotypes. And so prejudiced people tend to think in terms of stereotypes. And so this belief about someone based on where they come from, what they look like. So prejudiced attitudes. The most common and powerful ones are the ones that are based on things that we can see, like age, gender, and ethnicity. Although you can't see it, singleism is another kind. It's a more subtle form of maybe discrimination, where people who are young and single, they can pick up this duty or job because they're single. They don't have anyone to go home to. They don't have a social life. They don't have a family to take care of. And so that's another kind of stereotype that people have of young single people. And you got to be a little bit careful as you enter the workforce. Be aware of that some people may think, oh, well, they have nothing better to do with their time, so they can do this project, or because they're not married and don't have kids, they can spend extra hours after work. So you got to be aware of that. Stereotypes are likely to change when we learn more about specific members of the group. So if we isolate ourselves from those people who are older than us, if we isolate ourselves from people of different ethnic backgrounds, we're going to continue to have these stereotypes because we don't have any facts to refute what we believe or what we think is true. So by knowing these people and getting to know these people, we realize that some of our prejudgments are completely and totally false. How are prejudicial attitudes formed and retained? Most of it's childhood experiences. No one is born prejudiced. They learn it, especially from their family and parents. Those are the people who pass on stereotypes and prejudices and bias. Ethnocentrism, this belief that your own culture and nation or traditions are better than everybody else's. It's common all over the world, but it impacts ours, that we're right, they're wrong. Economic factors. During tough times, during recessions or depressions, prejudicial attitudes increase tremendously. And you can see that in Nazi Germany. Economically, things were bad. The Jews got targeted, and you don't need to know the rest of the story because you kind of have already known it. Some of these are unconscious things that we've picked up over time, maybe from television or newspapers or whatever, but they're there and they're kind of like an iceberg where they're hidden and we really don't know, and so they kind of rear their ugly head sometimes, and so you got to be aware that those are there as well. The many forms. Discrimination. So it's behavior based on prejudicial attitudes. For example, If someone's older, you think, oh, they're at the end of their prime, so we're not going to promote them. That's discrimination. It denies equal treatment, and it doesn't judge them on their own individual abilities. It's judging them on a pre-assumed idea of what these people can and can't do, and many different forms of it. Some of it's overt, biasing on gender or age. Some of it is a little bit more subtle. Race is another one. And the thing to keep in mind is race does not exist. It is a man-made construct. Biologically, scientifically, there's nothing to it. It's just a box that people have made to put people in. So race and ethnicity really doesn't work. So religion is another one. Physical, mental disabilities is another form of discrimination. Sexual orientation is another one. Subtle forms. This is kind of hard when you go into the legal protection. Because they're so subtle, they're hard to see. And so, for example, one of the problems that people have run into from the recent recession is there's this discrimination against people who have been unemployed for the last 4, 5, 6 years. So people who maybe got laid off in 2009 because of the recession, they haven't been able to find work, and they're finding it difficult to get hired because some people are wondering, well, why have you been unemployed so long? You know, maybe it's because you're not a good employee, maybe you're not trying very hard. And so there's these subtle forms of discrimination that takes place. So if you're discriminated against, these are the things that you can do. You can decide whether you want to stay with the organization or find someplace else to work. You can decide whether or not this is something that you can change. Is this something you have control over? Address it directly, or it won't ever change. And if you address it to the person you think is being discriminatory and you get nowhere, you may have to go higher up the chain. Review your assertiveness skills, stand up for yourself, and compensate by excelling. You know, be better than the person who's discriminating against you. Valuing diversity is extremely important in today's world because there is so much diversity and our world is changing and it's global and it's getting smaller and smaller. If you don't look for the individual talents, ideas, experience, and perspectives of all of your employees, you're only going to be partially as good. And if you think about some of those societies that are completely shutting out women, over 50% or nearly 50% of their population is denied the ability to make it a better country. So, I mean, that's the cost of all of this. So valuing diversity can reduce negative effects like turnover, absenteeism, and low productivity. Those companies that embrace diversity have fewer people leave, they have less people missing work, and they are more efficient and more productive. And it can give you a big competitive advantage. So managing diversity, how do you create an organizational culture that respects primary, secondary dimensions and embraces all the people? As the workforce becomes more diverse, it becomes even more challenging because you have different groups of people from different backgrounds, from different ages, and so you have to figure out a way to make sure all of it works and clicks. What individuals can do, even though you can't totally eliminate prejudices, you can learn to change negative attitudes and behaviors by looking critically and honestly at myths and preconceived ideas. Fight those with facts. Develop sensitivity to differences and develop a diversity awareness program to help teach your employees to look for the good in all of this diversity. What organizations can do, organizational commitment. You know, make sure that accepting, embracing diversity and using that to gain a competitive advantage is advertised. Tell people we want diversity. Diversity makes us a better company. For older people, or maybe you don't have a lot of women, or maybe you don't have a lot of people from different countries or different backgrounds or different regions of the country. Seek out those people and bring them into your organization, and then train and develop them. Set them up for success. So affirmative action yesterday and today, under the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Title IX, well, I guess that's Title VII, but Title IX is also, you can't discriminate on the basis of all of those different things that are listed here. And if you do, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is going to visit you, and that's going to be a problem. So affirmative action was a program that encourages the hiring, promotion, and even the acceptance of groups that have been discriminated against in the past. It was an effort to make up for past wrongs and try and make things more equal. Lately, this has been under fire due to the recent Supreme Court rulings. The University of Michigan, they ruled that they no longer had to follow affirmative action in terms of admitting people to college. And it's going to be interesting to see what impact that has. Most research shows that you're going to have a 5 or basically the number of people from different ethnic groups that are accepted into college is going to be cut in about half, or at least 25%. So somewhere between 25% and 50% of the people from that minority group are probably not going to get accepted anymore, and we'll see if that holds true or not. Some people think it's time to rethink affirmative action. The reason is they say preferences themselves are discriminatory. If you are accepting, for example, African American students because they're African American, not based on their GPA or not based on their ACT, then you're being discriminatory against the whites. Preferences do not make sense given changing demographics, the fact that the country is constantly changing and that minority groups are growing at a faster rate. That's going to change things up and shake things up. And really, socioeconomic status is a better indicator of need. In other words, it is better to look at the income of people if you want to help and you want to even the playing field and you want to make a difference. Hire people from lower socioeconomic groups, not based on race or gender.